There's a sound paper makes when you're not supposed to find it. Not the rustle of a grocery list or a gas station napkin. A different sound. Sharper. Almost like it knows what it is before you do. I heard that sound on a Tuesday in March, standing in my own laundry room, holding my wife's blazer by the collar, doing the thing I'd done 1,000 times without thinking twice, checking the pockets before the wash. There was a piece of paper folded into a small, careful square. The kind of fold you only do when you don't want something found, but you can't quite bring yourself to throw it away either. A hotel receipt. 41 miles from our house. Two names on the folio. Hers. And the name of the man who'd stood next to me at my own wedding 12 years earlier, in a rented tuxedo, crying harder than I was when I said my vows. I want to tell you something before we go any further. This isn't really a story about her. It's not even really a story about him, though you'll hear plenty about both of them before we're done. This is a story about what a piece of paper the size of your palm can do to a man who thought he already knew exactly who he was and exactly what his life was built on. I didn't know yet, standing in that laundry room with the water running. I thought I did. I was wrong. Let me back up, because you need to understand what I was standing on top of before I tell you how it cracked. I was 43 years old, married 11 years to a woman named Claire. Two kids, a daughter who just turned 9 and was obsessed with horses she'd never ridden, and a son, 6, who still wanted me to check under his bed every night for something neither of us believed was there. But we did it anyway, because it was ours. A ritual. The kind of small thing you don't know you'll miss until it's gone. And then there was Marcus. Marcus and I met when we were 8 years old, on a little league team neither of us was any good at. We grew up 2 streets apart. He was the best man at my wedding. He held my son the night he was born, in a hospital hallway, while I sat with Claire, and when I came out to find him, he was crying again, the same way he had at the altar. He coached our daughter's soccer team on weekends. He'd had a key to our house for 6 years, mostly so he could feed our dog when we traveled. I am telling you all of this not to make you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because I want you to understand what it means when I say I never once, not for a single second in 35 years of friendship, considered the possibility that Marcus was capable of what I'm about to tell you. That's the part people don't talk about enough. It's not just the betrayal of the person who promised to love you. It's the quiet, total collapse of every memory you have of the person standing beside them. Every birthday, every late-night phone call when you were falling apart. Every single one of those moments gets a second meaning, retroactively, the day you find out. But I didn't know that yet. Not in March. In March, all I had were small things. Things I noticed and set down again. The way you set down a hot pan without quite admitting it burned you. Claire had started staying late at the office. A new project, she said, something with a client in another city. She came home smelling different some nights. Not bad, just different. A perfume I didn't recognize, though I told myself maybe she'd just bought something new and hadn't mentioned it, because why would she? It's a perfume. People don't narrate their lives to you in real time. Her phone started living face down on counters. She started taking calls in the car, in the driveway, engine still running, finishing up before she came inside. I noticed. And then I did the thing that good, trusting men do, the thing I am almost ashamed of now, even though I understand exactly why I did it. I talked myself out of noticing. I told myself I wasn't the kind of man who checked his wife's phone. I told myself that suspicion was its own kind of poison, that a marriage built on watching each other was already a marriage in trouble, and ours wasn't in trouble. Ours was 11 years deep, 2 kids deep, a mortgage and a dog, and 1,000 inside jokes deep. So when she paid off a credit card statement before I'd seen it, said she didn't want me to worry about the number, she'd handle it, I let it go. When she came back from her sister's one weekend a little quieter than usual, a little more careful with me than usual, I told myself grief does strange things to people, and her sister had been going through a divorce, and maybe that was just sitting heavy on her. There was one night, maybe a week before everything came apart, that I still think about more than almost any other. We'd had Marcus over for dinner. Nothing unusual. He was over often enough that my kids called him Uncle Marcus without anyone ever officially deciding that should be his title. Claire was quieter than normal that night, and at one point, when I came up behind her at the sink and put my arms around her the way I had 10,000 times before, she went stiff for just a second before she relaxed into it. I remember noticing it. I remember a small, cold flicker of a thought. Something's different. And I remember watching Marcus laugh at something my son said across the table and deciding, consciously, to let the thought go. He was Marcus. She was my wife. The architecture of my trust in both of them was load-bearing, built over decades, and it never once occurred to me that the crack I just felt might be in the foundation itself rather than somewhere harmless on the surface. I want you to sit with that for a second. A man can know, somewhere underneath the parts of himself he's willing to listen to, and still spend a month talking himself out of it. Not because he's foolish, because the alternative is unthinkable, and the mind protects you from unthinkable things for as long as it possibly can. It protected me for about 4 weeks. And then a hotel receipt fell out of a blazer pocket, and it couldn't protect me anymore. I want to walk you through exactly what happened in the 60 seconds after I unfolded that receipt, because I think about it more than I think about almost anything else from that year. The first thing was the cold. Not metaphorical cold. Actual, physical cold, starting in my hands and moving up my arms like my own blood had decided to leave the building. The second thing was the sound, or the absence of it. The washing machine was still running behind me, and I remember being aware of it the way you're aware of a sound in a dream, distant, irrelevant, happening to someone else. The date on the receipt was a Thursday, 3 weeks earlier. The same Thursday Claire told me she was staying at her sister's because her sister needed her. I remember that night clearly, because I'd made the kids breakfast for dinner, pancakes, because that's what we did when Mom was away, and my daughter had syrup in her hair, and I'd thought, not for the first time, that I had a good life. An ordinary, good life. The receipt said 2 adults. 1 room. King bed. And there, on the second line of guest information, where hotels sometimes print a secondary name for incidentals or room service charges, his name. Marcus's full name, the one only his mother and the IRS ever used. I didn't say anything out loud. There was no one to say it to. I stood in that laundry room for what felt like 20 minutes, though it was probably 90 seconds, just reading the same 6 lines over and over, waiting for them to rearrange themselves into something else. They never did. Here is the part that surprised me about myself. I didn't call her. I didn't call him. I didn't throw anything, or cry, or do any of the things I would have guessed I'd do if you'd asked me, hypothetically, a year earlier, what I'd do if I ever found something like this. Instead, something in me went very quiet and very precise. I folded the receipt back along its original creases and put it in my own pocket, and I started paying attention in a way I never had before. Over the next 9 days, I built a picture I didn't want, one piece at a time. I looked at our bank statements going back 6 months and found 3 other charges I'd never questioned. A parking garage downtown on a day she said she was at a conference, a restaurant 40 minutes from her office on a night she said she was working through dinner at her desk. I looked at the calendar on the shared family app and cross-referenced it against a work trip Marcus had mentioned to me in passing almost 2 months before. A trip, it turned out, that overlapped with a weekend Claire had told me she was visiting her college roommate. It wasn't one mistake. It wasn't even one relationship contained neatly in one window of time I could point to and say, there, that's where it started, that's where it ended. It was a pattern, possibly 6 months old, possibly longer. I genuinely don't know to this day exactly when it started, and there is a specific kind of grief in that not knowing. The grief of realizing you cannot trust your own memories anymore, because you don't know which of them were real and which of them were a man standing in your kitchen, eating your food, lying to your face while you refilled his glass. I thought about my son's birth. I thought about Marcus crying in that hallway. I went back through 11 years of memories with this new, cold light shining on all of them, and I couldn't find a single one that felt safe to stand on anymore. There was a particular evening, 5 days into my quiet investigation, when I sat in my car in the parking lot of Claire's office for almost 2 hours after work hours ended, watching the door, not entirely sure what I was hoping to see or not see. She came out alone that night, got in her car, and drove straight home. I remember the strange, hollow relief of that, followed almost immediately by the recognition that relief over one ordinary evening didn't undo what 8 months of receipts and calendars had already told me. I wasn't looking for one more piece of proof anymore. I think, if I'm honest, I was looking for a reason to stop looking. I never found one. I also did something that surprised me when I look back on it now. I drove past the hotel itself, the one from the receipt, on a Sunday afternoon when I was supposed to be picking up paint samples for a bathroom we'd been meaning to redo for years. I sat in the lot for 10 minutes, looking at a building that meant nothing to me and everything to me at the same time. Just a beige 3-story building off the highway with a chain restaurant attached to it. The kind of place nobody chooses for anything memorable. I think I needed to see that it was real, that it existed in the actual world, with actual carpet and actual ice machines, and wasn't just a sentence I'd invented out of fear. By the 9th day, I had what I needed. Not because I was building a legal case, though it would matter for that too eventually. I needed it because some part of me, the part that had spent a month explaining away perfume and phone calls and credit card statements, needed enough proof that I would never again be able to talk myself out of what was true. On the 10th night, after the kids were asleep, I put the receipt on the kitchen counter, face up, and I waited for her to come home. She didn't notice it at first. She came in talking about something at work, set her bag down, kissed the side of my head the way she did most nights, and it took her almost a full minute. I counted later, in my memory, the way you count things you can't stop replaying, before her eyes landed on the counter and the talking just stopped. I watched her face do something I will never be able to fully describe to you. It wasn't one expression. It was 4 or 5 of them, in sequence, in under 3 seconds. Confusion, recognition, calculation, and then something that looked almost like relief, which I didn't understand until much later. The relief of a person who has been carrying something heavy and alone for months, finally being allowed to put it down, even if putting it down meant everything was about to end. She started with the version where it was nothing, a work thing, a miscommunication on the bill. I let her finish that version completely, without interrupting, because I wanted to know how far she'd take it. She took it about 90 seconds, and then it collapsed under its own weight, the way a lie does when the person telling it can see in your eyes that you already know. The next version was the truth, or some early, frightened draft of it. It had been going on, she said, since a work conference back in the fall. 8 months earlier, not 6, I'd undercounted. It wasn't supposed to become anything. He'd been going through a hard time in his own marriage. She'd been going through something too, something she said she hadn't even told me about. A kind of loneliness she didn't have words for that had been sitting in her for years before any of this started. I want to be honest with you about something. I didn't yell. I have wished, many times since, that I had. Yelling would have felt like something. What I actually did was sit down at the kitchen table, very calmly, and ask her one question. Does he know I know? She said no. While she was still answering, my phone lit up on the counter. Marcus's name on the screen. He was calling to ask if I wanted to grab a beer that weekend, completely unaware that the woman across the table from me had just finished telling me the truth. I looked at his name glowing there for what felt like a very long time. I didn't answer it. I have never answered a call from that man again. Not once, not in the years since, and I don't expect that to change. That was the moment something in me finished breaking that had only been cracking before. Not when I found the receipt. Not during the 9 days of quiet investigating. Right there, watching his name light up my phone mid-confession, understanding all at once that I wasn't just losing a marriage. I was losing the person who had been at every important moment of my adult life. standing next to me, smiling, while apparently building something underneath me the entire time. She tried, in those next few minutes, to fill the silence with more, that it had never been about love, that it was confusion, loneliness, a mistake that kept repeating itself because neither of them knew how to stop it once it started. I remember thinking, with a strange, detached clarity, that an 8-month mistake isn't a mistake anymore. It's a second life, running quietly alongside the one I thought we were both living. She reached for my hand at one point, across the table, and I let her take it for a second before I pulled it back. Not out of cruelty. I just genuinely didn't know, in that moment, who that hand belonged to anymore, or what it had been doing for the better part of a year while it was also doing the dishes in our kitchen and tucking our children into bed. I packed a bag that night. Not dramatically. I didn't throw clothes into it. I didn't slam anything. I folded things the way I always do, because some habits don't leave you even when everything else does. I told her I needed a few days. She asked where I was going. I told her it wasn't her business anymore, which was the first genuinely cruel thing I'd said in 11 years of marriage, and I didn't take it back, because for the first time in a month, it felt like the truest thing I'd said. I drove to my brother's house 40 minutes away, arrived a little after 11, and slept, or didn't sleep, on a pull-out couch that smelled like the basement it lived in. I lay there in the dark, 43 years old, mourning two relationships at once, and I remember thinking, very clearly, that grief for a friendship you've lost to betrayal is a strange, under-discussed thing. Nobody sends flowers for that one. Nobody asks how you're holding up. You're just supposed to absorb it, quietly, on a pull-out couch in your brother's basement, and figure out how to face Monday. The hardest part wasn't the lawyer's office, though we'll get there. It wasn't even the long, slow unraveling of finances, and who got what, and who was keeping the house. The hardest part was my daughter, 3 days later, looking up at me across the kitchen table and asking why my eyes looked tired all the time now. I hadn't told them anything yet. Claire and I had agreed, in one of the only conversations we had that month that wasn't a fight, that the kids would learn what they needed to learn in stages, gently, on a timeline that protected them rather than satisfied either of our needs to be understood. That meant performing something for them. Not lying, exactly. Just folding the wreckage small enough that it could fit behind a normal Tuesday. I picked them up from school. I helped with homework. I checked under my son's bed every single night, on schedule, even on the nights I'd slept 4 hours and felt like I was operating somebody else's body. And every so often, my daughter, 9 years old, sharper than she had any right to be, would look at me a beat too long, and I'd know that kids absorb far more than we ever give them credit for, even when we think we're hiding it well. I told her, that day at the kitchen table, that grown-ups go through hard things sometimes, the same way kids do, and that it wasn't anything she'd done, and that I loved her exactly the same as I had the day before and the day before that. It wasn't the whole truth. It was the true part of the truth that a 9-year-old could carry without it crushing her, and I have never regretted choosing that version first. My son was harder to read, in a different way. He didn't ask questions so much as he just started sleeping in my bed some nights, climbing in around 2 or 3 in the morning without a word, and I never once turned him away, even on the nights I'd only just managed to fall asleep myself. There's a particular kind of stillness in lying awake next to a 6-year-old who doesn't fully understand what's wrong but understands, on some animal level, that something is. I'd lie there and listen to him breathe and think about how badly I wanted to protect that breathing from everything I was carrying, and how little control I actually had over whether I'd succeed. Outside our house, the wreckage spread faster than I expected. Marcus's wife found out within 2 weeks. Not from me, though I understand why she assumed it was. I found out later that Claire had told her herself, in a strange, guilt-driven phone call, trying to control how the story got told before it got told without her in the room. It didn't work the way she hoped. Marcus's wife called me directly, and we sat on the phone for almost 2 hours, Two strangers bonded by the same betrayal from two different angles, comparing notes like survivors of the same accident who'd been sitting in different cars. Our friend group, the one we'd built over 15 years of barbecues and birthday parties and a group chat that had Marcus's terrible jokes in it going back a decade, split almost exactly down the middle, the way these things do. Some people called me. Some people went quiet, not out of malice, just out of the particular cowardice that comes from not knowing what to say and choosing silence instead of risking the wrong words. The soccer team needed a new coach for the spring season, and I remember standing in the parking lot of that field, watching some other father I barely knew run drills with my daughter, feeling something I can only describe as a second, smaller grief, riding shotgun behind the bigger one. The practical machinery started moving whether I was ready or not. A lawyer, recommended by my brother, who spoke about my marriage in terms of assets and custody schedules within the first 15 minutes of meeting me, which felt obscene and necessary at the same time. Joint accounts that had to be separated. A house that held 11 years of furniture choices and paint colors we'd argued over and finally agreed on, now needing to be assigned a dollar value and split like it was just another asset, instead of the place I'd carried my son into for the first time. There was a Tuesday night, a few weeks into all of this, when I went to pick up a takeout order I'd called in, and the woman behind the counter, someone I'd seen 100 times, never exchanged more than a few words with, looked at me with an expression I didn't expect. Not pity exactly. Recognition. It turned out her own marriage had ended the same way 2 years earlier, and she told me, handing me my bag of food across the counter, that the first 6 months were the worst, and that nobody warns you how much logistics there are to grief, the appointments, the paperwork, the calendars that need rebuilding from nothing. I don't know why that small, unplanned conversation with a stranger stayed with me as long as it did. I think it was the first time since the laundry room that someone looked at me and I didn't feel like I had to explain or perform anything. She just knew, and that was enough. I'm not going to pretend that period was anything other than what it was. It was the loneliest stretch of my adult life. Not because I was alone in any literal sense. My brother kept me close. A few real friends kept showing up uninvited with takeout and silence, which I needed more than advice. It was lonely in a deeper way. The particular loneliness of realizing that the version of your life you'd been building toward for over a decade had just been quietly hollowed out from the inside by the two people you trusted with the most weight, and you were the last to know. Somewhere around the 8-week mark, something shifted. I can't point to the exact day, the way I can point to the exact day I found that receipt. It was slower than that, quieter, more like a tide than a wave. I started running again, something I'd done in my 20s and let go of somewhere in the busy middle of marriage and fatherhood. Nothing dramatic, just 3 miles, most mornings, before the kids woke up, in the kind of cold that makes your lungs hurt in a way that feels honest. I wasn't running from anything, and I wasn't running toward anything either. I think I was just running because it was mine. Nobody's idea but my own. The first thing in months that belonged entirely to me, that no one else had a hand in shaping or breaking. I also started fixing things in the garage, small, useless, deeply satisfying things. A wobbly chair I'd ignored for 3 years. A shelf my father-in-law had built badly a decade earlier. I'm not a craftsman. I'm not going to tell you I discovered some hidden talent for woodworking that changed my life. What I discovered was something simpler than that. The specific, grounding relief of working with my hands on a problem that had a clear beginning, middle, and end. Sand it, glue it, clamp it, wait. Unlike everything else happening in my life that spring, a chair either holds your weight or it doesn't, and you find out the same day, and then you move on to the next thing. I remember calling my father during that stretch, a man who isn't naturally talkative, who I'd called maybe 4 times in the previous 2 years outside of holidays. I told him most of it, sitting in my car outside the hardware store, engine running for the heat. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. And then he said something I've turned over in my mind more times than I can count since. He said, You've spent your whole life being the reliable one, the one people count on. I don't think you ever stopped to ask whether anyone was being reliable back. I didn't have an answer for that, sitting in the car. I'm not sure I have a complete answer for it even now. But it cracked something open that had been sealed shut since I was a kid. This quiet, unexamined assumption that my worth was measured entirely by how much I could be counted on, by how little I asked for in return. Claire hadn't just betrayed a marriage. In some smaller, harder-to-name way, she'd exposed how long I'd been measuring my own value by other people's need for me, instead of anything that belonged to me alone. I started noticing how often, in the years before all of this, I'd been the one who rearranged his schedule, who skipped things, who said, "It's fine, go ahead," when it genuinely wasn't fine, simply because keeping the peace felt safer than asking for what I actually wanted. I'm not saying that caused what happened. I want to be clear about that, because it would be easy and wrong to turn this into a story where I find some flaw in myself that excuses what two other people chose to do. It doesn't excuse anything. But sitting with my father's question did make me realize that the man standing in that garage, sanding down somebody else's bad shelf at 11 at night, had been quietly disappearing into other people's needs for a very long time, long before Claire and Marcus ever gave him a reason to notice. That's not a complaint. It's an observation, the kind you can only really make once you're standing a few months outside the wreckage, looking back at the man who was still inside it. I wasn't angry at myself for being loyal or steady or the one who checked under the bed every night. I just started, for the first time in a long time, asking what I wanted separate from what was needed of me. It didn't happen all at once. There were still nights that month where I'd find myself standing in front of the open refrigerator at 11 at night, not hungry, just standing there, because moving felt like too much. There were still mornings I sat in the driveway for 10 extra minutes before going inside to make breakfast, gathering whatever I had left before handing it to two kids who needed their father intact, or at least convincingly so. But somewhere in there, the quiet started to feel less like absence and more like space. Space I hadn't had in 11 years and didn't entirely know what to do with yet, but space nonetheless. The first time I laughed, really laughed, not the polite kind I'd been performing for my kids and my brother, was at something stupid on the radio, alone in my car, 3 months in. I remember being almost startled by the sound of it. I remember thinking, quietly, that maybe I was still in there after all. About 5 months after that night in the laundry room, I stood at the edge of my daughter's school auditorium, watching her in a winter recital she'd practiced for weeks, and I noticed something almost by accident. I was standing there alone. Claire was 2 rows back, an arrangement we'd settled into without much discussion, civil enough for the kids' sake. And for the first time, standing alone in a room full of other people's intact families didn't feel like a wound. It just felt like where I happened to be standing. If you've made it this far with me, I want to invite you to subscribe to our channel and join us every day. I say that to you the way I'd say it to someone sitting across from me at a kitchen table, because that's genuinely how this feels to me. Like I'm telling you something real, and you're someone who decided it was worth staying for. That matters more than you probably know. A few weeks before that recital, something small happened that I think belongs here. My daughter's teacher pulled me aside at pickup and told me, gently, that she'd written a short story in class that week about a girl whose dad fixes broken chairs and doesn't even get mad when they wobble at first. I sat in my car afterward longer than I needed to. It wasn't a sign from anywhere mystical, and I'm not going to dress it up as one. It was just a 9-year-old noticing something true about the man raising her and saying it out loud to someone else when she didn't think it would ever reach me. That mattered more than almost anything any adult said to me that whole year. There's one more piece of this I haven't told you yet, and it's the part that surprised me most. About 4 months after the divorce was filed, Marcus reached out. Not a call. He knew better than to try that again. A letter, actually handwritten, which felt almost absurd given how we'd grown up texting each other dumb jokes for 20 years. I read it twice. It was long and careful, and full of the kind of language people use when they're trying to apologize for something they know doesn't have a clean apology available. Words like, "I never meant for it to become what it became," and "I think about what I threw away every day." I didn't respond, not out of cruelty, and not because I was still consumed by rage by that point. By month 4, the rage had mostly burned down into something colder and steadier, more like resolve than fire. I didn't respond because I genuinely had nothing left to say to him that would matter. Some doors don't need to be slammed shut. Some just need to be left exactly where they are, quietly, permanently closed, while you walk on toward whatever's next. I kept that letter for a while, in a drawer in my new place, before I finally threw it away. Not in anger, just because I noticed one day that I'd gone almost 2 months without thinking about it. And a letter you don't think about doesn't need a drawer anymore. Our old friend group never fully reassembled. A couple of the guys from that group chat reached out to me individually, awkwardly, months later, the way men do when they don't quite have the language for what they want to say, and I appreciated the effort more than the words themselves. Marcus, as far as I know, doesn't coach soccer anymore. I didn't ask. Someone mentioned it once, in passing, and I let it pass right back. The divorce itself, when it finally came, was almost anticlimactic compared to everything that led up to it. A courthouse. A judge who'd clearly read 1,000 of these and felt nothing about ours in particular, which was, strangely, a relief. Claire and I split the house proceeds, split custody close to evenly, and shook hands afterward in a hallway that smelled like every government building smells, like nothing in particular, like the absence of anything memorable, which felt right for an ending that had already happened months earlier, in a kitchen, over a folded receipt. I want to tell you that I felt triumphant walking out of that courthouse. I didn't. I felt tired, in a clean way. The tired you feel after finishing something difficult, rather than the tired you feel while you're still in the middle of it. My brother was waiting outside, leaning against his truck, and he didn't say anything profound. He just handed me a coffee and said, "Come on, let's go get the kids." And we did. We stopped for ice cream on the way, even though it was February and far too cold for it, because my daughter had been asking for weeks, and I didn't have a good reason left to keep saying not today. We sat in a mostly empty shop with bad fluorescent lighting, the three of us, and my son got more ice cream on his jacket than in his mouth. And for about 20 minutes, nothing about that afternoon required me to be brave or steady or anything other than exactly who I was. I remember looking at both of them across that table and thinking, somewhere underneath the exhaustion, that whatever else had been taken from me that year, this part, this exact, ordinary, sticky jacket part, had not. It's been a little over 2 years now since that Tuesday in March. My daughter is 11 and has finally ridden an actual horse, twice, and was unimpressed both times, which I found funnier than I probably should have. My son still wants me to check under his bed, though he started pretending he doesn't, the way boys his age start pretending about most things that still matter to them. I still run most mornings. The chair I fixed in the garage is still holding weight in my kitchen, which feels like a small, stupid kind of proof that some things, once repaired properly, actually stay repaired. I see Claire at school events. We're civil, sometimes more than civil. There are moments, watching our kids together, where the old ease between us flickers back for a second, and I let it, because hatred takes more daily maintenance than I'm willing to give it anymore. I don't know what she and Marcus have or don't have now, and at some point, without really deciding to, I stopped needing to know. A few months ago, I was doing laundry, my own laundry, in my own house, the one I bought after the divorce, smaller than the old one, entirely mine. I checked the pockets of a jacket before throwing it in the wash, the same way I always have, an old habit that never left even after everything it had once led me to. There was nothing in the pocket, just lint, and a receipt of my own, for something forgettable, gas, I think, or coffee. I stood there for a second longer than the moment really required, and I noticed, almost like checking a wound that had finally stopped hurting when you press it, that I wasn't braced for anything anymore. I wasn't waiting to find something that would break me again. There was simply nothing left to be afraid of finding, because I already knew exactly who I was, with or without anyone else's name folded into my pockets. I'm not going to tell you this story has a tidy lesson at the end of it, because I don't think it does, and I think you'd see through it if I try to hand you one anyway. I'll just tell you what's true. I lost a marriage and a 35-year friendship in the same 10 days. And somewhere on the other side of that loss, without ever planning it, I found a version of myself I actually like standing next to. If this found you at the right moment, do me a favor. Follow the channel, and if it's not too much to ask, share it with 5 people who might need to hear a story like this one today. Leave me an honest comment. Not what you think I want to hear, just what's actually true for you right now. And if you've got a story you think I should tell next, something that's been sitting heavy in you, write it below. I read every single one. I'll see you in the next one.